Michelle told me to tell you to smash the like if you believe that it's ridiculous to compare Mick Foley to Jon Moxley. You can make the argument that Jon has watered down extreme matches and the mystique of extreme matches. Also, bunny hopping is hella fun.
You see, here's what I don't like about fans of All Elite Fake Pro Wrestling. They love to grasp at straws. How dare you compare Mick Foley to Dean Ambrose? That's an insult. Dean Ambrose will never be Mick Foley. Even though Mick Foley is now a left-wing nut job, I can't take away the fact that Mick Foley was a legend, an icon. Now, let's compare Mick Foley to Dean Ambrose. Mick Foley never had go-away heat. Bruh, people don't want to see Dean Ambrose on TV. So, are you blind? Tone deaf? My God, every fan of All Elite Fake Pro Wrestling is very tone deaf. Like, Mick Foley was just as over as Stone Cold, Rocky Maivia, Kane, Taker. He was just as over. In fact, it was Stone Cold, Rocky Maivia, and then it was Mankind. Top 3 guys in the company that were just as over. Every time people heard that car crash, Mick Foley had major pops on Raw, SmackDown, etc. That man is an icon. Now, if you want to compare who's the better hardcore fake pro wrestler, Dean Ambrose is a cosplayer. Mick Foley was an innovator. Huge difference. Mick Foley, he told stories through his hardcore matches. Not so much Dean Ambrose. He goes for shock factors. That's Dean Ambrose. He's a shit hardcore wrestler. He doesn't know what he's doing. This man has awful ring psychology. He's an awful fake pro wrestler. Mick Foley told stories. At least Mick Foley versus Taker had a backstory. Those men had a blood feud, so it made sense for Mick Foley to jump off the cage. That did make sense. But let's dive deeper on why Mick Foley jumped off the cage. Because Mick Foley got tired of wrestling Taker multiple times. He was tired of it. So he felt like, you know what? We need to do something different. How about you toss me off the cage? That's what happened. Mick Foley was trying to entertain the fans because he thought the fans were tired of this matchup. So this was on Mick Foley, not so much Taker. At least Mick Foley was trying to spice things up. And yes, I get it. That did make sense. Hell, back then, I was tired of seeing Taker versus Mankind. Fucking casket matches, Better Live matches, ballroom matches, bruh. They had a fucking trilogy that the fans got sick of. So it didn't make sense for Mick Foley to get tossed off the cage to try something new. Mick Foley got sick of wrestling Taker. So it did make sense. Dean Ambrose getting body slammed on a spiked bat? Why? You and Edge had no blood feud. That was so dumb. It made no sense. That spot was uncalled for based on the heat of that feud. That feud had no heat. So why are you going overboard to sell this feud? That's your fault. But why risk your health if the feud doesn't call for it? Let's talk about Isaiah Swerve Scott versus Dean Ambrose. Why did that match become a hardcore match without it becoming a hardcore match? Who asked for a fucking ladder to be added to the fucking match? Bruh, it's not a ladder match, so that was dumb. Awful ring psychology. Dean Ambrose might go down as the worst hardcore fake pro wrestler of all time. And yes, I said it. Listen, my first love when it comes to fake pro wrestling, it was hardcore matches. Yes, I was a huge fanboy of hardcore matches. My all-time favorite hardcore fake pro wrestler is Tommy Dreamer. Tommy Dreamer knew what the fuck he was doing. He was not doing hardcore matches just for the fuck of it. His matches had story. Just ask Raven. Ask Sandman. Ask Rob Van Dam, New Jack, etc. Axel Rotten. Tommy Dreamer was great in hardcore matches because he knew what the fuck he was doing. He was not going overboard. Every feud called for it. It's like, man, I hate Dean Ambrose as a fake pro wrestler. Alongside Isaiah Swerve Scott, all I see are New Jack wannabes. First off, why are you bleeding? I'm talking about Isaiah Swerve Scott. Why are you bleeding in a non-hardcore match, you doofus? That's what I mean. You will never be at the level of King Booker. When was the last time King Booker bleeded in a fucking match? Right? That's dumb. You and Dean Ambrose had no beef for you to be bleeding. And the fact that your dumbass lost, so you cut yourself and you lost. And your dumbass got buried by the Young Bucks. You reap what you sow. Keep your mouth shut. That's called karma. Don't talk shit about King Booker. But let's talk about Randy Orton versus Mick Foley. That was a great match that had backstory, that had a story behind it. They had a great hardcore match that made sense. What about Edge versus Mick Foley? What about Triple H versus Mick Foley? Hell in a Cell hardcore match. That was great shit. That was theater. Because Triple H and Mick Foley had a blood feud before that match. Mick Foley didn't always do hardcore matches in the World Wrestling Federation, but every time Mick Foley did hardcore matches, it made sense. It was not forced. Dean Ambrose is a fanboy doing hardcore matches. Mick Foley was an alpha male doing hardcore matches. Every match made sense. Every match had a backstory. Every match had a reason on why it was a hardcore match. This is why Brock Lesnar said no to Dean Ambrose at WrestleMania. He was trying to do dumb shit. And in hindsight, Brock is a fucking genius. Because now, look at Dean Ambrose. The world has turned on Dean Ambrose. You owe Brock an apology. By that same metric, by that same logic, you owe Brock an apology. He knew what the fuck he was doing. He knew doing dumb shit at WrestleMania, it's uncalled for, it's not needed. I'm Brock Lesnar. I don't need hardcore matches for the fans to care. That's what Brock was trying to tell Dean Ambrose. I'm Brock. I'm the biggest draw. We don't need to do hardcore bullshit. Let's talk about corporate Rocky Maivia versus Mankind. Those guys did not like each other. Every match was a blood feud. Remember, I think it was the halftime show on Sunday Night Heat. That was a hardcore match. What about the I Quit match? That was great shit. I'm talking about the tracksuit Rocky Maivia. Mankind, Rocky Maivia had a great feud, a great trilogy that the fans still talk about to this day. They had a backstory. Remember, Rocky Maivia gave, I think, Mankind maybe 25 chair shots. That was great shit. That made sense. They had a blood feud that called for it. Hell, I think Mankind's family was in the front row as Rocky Maivia was whooping his ass. That's called theater. That's called great shit. So his hardcore matches made sense because the fans felt sorry for him. The fans don't feel sorry for Dean Ambrose. So how dare you compare Dean to Mick Foley? He's not beloved like Mick Foley. The fans felt sorry for Mick Foley. Every match that Mick had, the fans loved. Even though it was hardcore matches, he still felt sympathy from the fans. So what's my all-time favorite match of Mick Foley? It is Triple H versus Cactus Jack, Hell in a Cell. That was an iconic match. My God, Triple H gave Mick Foley a pedigree on thumbtacks. That's called hardcore shit that makes sense. Bruh, it was Cactus Jack. Cactus Jack was a deathmatch hardcore fake pro wrestler. So that match made sense, and they had a blood feud. He turned back into Cactus Jack. That put fear in Triple H. That match had a backstory. What I mean is, every time Mick Foley got pissed off, he turned back into Cactus Jack. That's what made Mick Foley special. This man had multiple gimmicks to rely on. So when Triple H pushed Mick Foley over the edge, he turned back into Cactus Jack. That's called storytelling. So it made sense for Mick Foley and Triple H to have a hardcore grudge match at Hell in a Cell. Okay, for example, I think back in year one of All Elite Fake Pro Wrestling, Tony Khan, he booked Joey Janela versus Dean Ambrose. Ever since then, I said, you know what? Fuck Dean Ambrose. How dare you give Joey Janela all that offense? Bro, you were in the Shield. I can't imagine Roman Reigns having a competitive match with Joey Janela. I can't imagine Seth Rollins having a competitive match with Joey Janela. Are you crazy? So yes, ever since then, I said, fuck Dean Ambrose. He's an indie mark. This man had a hardcore competitive match with Joey Janela in year one of All Elite Wrestling. Last time I checked, where is Joey Janela in All Elite Wrestling? He's gone. I would say the only good thing that Dean Ambrose has done for the past 2 years is he no longer bleeds in matches. But that's about it. My whole entire point is, Cactus Jack was not having hardcore matches just for the fuck of it. Go back and watch his time in ECW. He was not having hardcore matches every week. That's my point. You people are brainwashed. You think that ECW was about the hardcore wrestling. To me, it feels like All Elite Wrestling is nothing more than a cosplay of ECW. Even though ECW was not always about the hardcore wrestling. Not until maybe 1995 or 96. But overall, Extreme Championship Wrestling was not all about the hardcore wrestling. Hell, Jimmy Snuka was in ECW. What about Perry Saturn? What about Eddie G? What about Chris Benoit? What about Rey Mysterio? Chris Jericho? Those men are not hardcore wrestlers, and yet they were in ECW. That's my point. Extreme Championship Wrestling was not all about the hardcore fake pro wrestling. You got it twisted. But every hardcore match in Extreme Championship Wrestling made sense. Every match had a backstory on why it was happening. Raven versus Sabu, that makes sense. Tommy Dreamer versus Axel Rotten, it did make sense for those two men to have a hardcore match. Go back and watch Mr. Hughes versus Sabu in ECW. They did not have a hardcore match. That was a regular standard match. Not every match in Extreme Championship Wrestling was a hardcore match. Listen, Dean Ambrose has done everything in his power to make people hate hardcore fake pro wrestling. And that's why I don't like Dean Ambrose. He makes me not like hardcore wrestling, even though that was my first love in fake pro wrestling. It was hardcore matches. Dean Ambrose has turned hardcore wrestling into a joke. If it gets to a point where Rob Van Dam is calling you out, the same man who was in Extreme Championship Wrestling, what does that tell you? That means your ass went overboard. Who told you to get body slammed on a spiked bat? Even a hardcore legend like Rob Van Dam will tell you, yeah, dumbass, that was dumb. What about Rhino, Kid Cash, Nova? Those men were not in hardcore matches. What about Jay Lynn, right? So my whole entire point is, do not define ECW as a hardcore company, because most of those guys became great wrestlers the moment they left ECW. Just keep in mind, Perry Saturn used to be in ECW. Stone Cold Steve Austin used to be in ECW. And guess what? He was not having hardcore fake pro wrestling matches. That's my point.